I'm still waiting for one person to put their proper name in to log in correctly. I'm going to wait a couple seconds to see if that happens, and then we are going to get started. To just confirm one last person there. I wasn't informed that we had an addition, so I just had to double check that. So let's get started. So today is day 4 of the Career Access for Newcomers workshops. We're going to be covering today all about the job interview and discussing a little bit about what's going to go on next steps once this workshop is finished. Okay, so let's get started. This is the overview of today's workshop. Oh, sorry, again, for those of you who are new, who were not with me on Tuesday, my name is David Northcott. I'm the other facilitator and employment specialist with this program, along with Jack DeYoung. So today's workshop schedule, we're going to be talking all about some stats and general information about interviews. The introductory part of the interview in Canada, called Breaking the Ice, we'll go over some really common questions that are asked at the starts of interview. And then we'll finish up the first half of this morning's workshop talking all about behavioral interviews and the STAR technique. Then we'll have a short period for questions and a 5-10 minute break. Then when we return, we'll come back, talk about hypothetical questions, or situational questions, as they're sometimes called. And then we'll give a lot of useful tips and information for preparation for job interviews. We'll talk about some other things that you might get caught off guard with, and just other things to know about the job interviews in general in Canada. Then we'll finish the morning off with another session for questions. So just like the other workshops, some of our stats and information comes from Society for Human Resource Management's large survey that they perform every few years. This workshop specifically, we get lots of information as well from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Wall Street Journal. A book called Nature via Nurture has some interesting information about job interviews and timing and whatnot. And also we get lots of data from LinkedIn and Indeed as well. Okay, I'm just going to let one more person in. Here we go. Okay, so just like the other workshops, we do not provide this PowerPoint to you, but you do have some summary information in the handouts that were provided to you before the workshops began. If for some reason you joined late, you don't have these handouts, if you reach out to Jack, he will send you the entire package. Okay, so at the job interview, we've got a gentleman coming in, shaking, sweating, scared. This is how many people are at job interviews, myself included. Even if you're really well prepared, you're going to feel nervous at job interviews. The goal of this workshop really is to help you prepare the best that you can, just to sort of dial down your anxiety as much as possible so that you can perform at your very best. What's the purpose of a job interview? Well, the purpose on the employer's side, of course, is to find out if you have the knowledge, skills, and experience that they're looking for. Employers want to find out if you will work hard. They're not going to just ask you simply, do you work hard? But they're going to gauge this by how much you talk about your accomplishments in your interview. So plus, they're also going to gauge how much you want the job by how well you've prepared for the interview. So it is important, definitely, to prepare and not just wing it. They also look for enthusiasm and motivation. Employers at the job interview, they also want to get an idea if you're going to fit into the culture of the organization and if you have the soft skills to get along with other employees and managers. We'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. Employers also want to find out if you're going to be happy in the position and if you'll stay with the organization, right? They don't want to hire someone and go through all the trouble of onboarding them and training them and for them just to leave after a couple months, and then they have to do all that initial work all over again with a new hire. This often comes up as well when they'll ask you, questions about your past work experience, especially if you seem like maybe you're applying for a job a little lower than you've done in your country of origin. They might think, well, he's a little overqualified, she's a little overqualified, she might leave in a couple months, right? So that's why they're going to ask questions about why you're applying for this type of job sometimes. Job interview statistics. This is good to give a bit of a background. First one we have here is that the average number of people who apply for any given job in Canada is about 118, and 20% of those applicants get interviews. So that number of 118, it's probably fairly close to accurate. The 20% though of people applying getting interviews is a little high for the types of jobs that most of you are applying for. This is including all really entry-level positions where they might have group interviews, right? Or they might actually do like just telephone calls to sort of narrow down people, and sometimes they'll count those as interviews as well, right? Even though it's just sort of like a screening call. Okay. 45% of job seekers get invited to 1 or 2 interviews after submitting up to 10 applications. Okay, so, if you're submitting like 30, 40 applications and you're not getting any interviews, well, that can say something like perhaps there's just, in your specific field, there might just be a lot of people applying for only a few jobs. It doesn't mean you're not applying for the right type of job, but that could mean that as well, right? It could mean that you're not really qualified for the jobs that you're applying for, or that your resume isn't targeted well enough, right? There's could be different explanations for that. 92% of recruiters screen candidates via social media, and 87% of recruiters use LinkedIn. Okay, so you want to make sure that your social media profile is positive, right, and that it puts you in the proper light. It is professional. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to let in 2 last people who are a little bit late, but I will make an exception and let them in. Here we go. Okay. And 82% of hiring managers employ virtual interviews, right? So this is obviously the norm now since COVID, and we'll talk more about virtual interviews a little bit later. 18% of employers eliminate candidates whose salary expectations are too high. So we talked, I think, a little bit about this the other day. You want to make sure, that you know the range that's fair for the types of jobs that you're applying for, and you also want to have an explanation ready if they do ask you what your salary expectations are for why you've landed on that particular number. Sometimes people might ask for a higher salary than they're offered. It's always good to remember that employers can and often do tell candidates who ask for a higher salary that they will take it back to their higher managers and discuss it. And sometimes they come back and they say, sorry, we've decided to give the job to someone else. It is legal for employers to do that, to just orally offer you a position, and or even on paper, and it hasn't been signed by anyone yet, to retract it if the candidate asks for higher salary. This has happened on more than one occasion with me and my clients over the years, so it's just something to keep in mind. 56% of employers take just 5 to 15 minutes to make a not to hire decision. Okay, so first impressions really do count, right? That first question, tell us a little bit about yourself, is important. 47% of employers said that they would reject a candidate who has little knowledge about the company where they're applying, right? Very important to research the company where you're having an interview, right? To know all about them, their history, their products, what are they known for. The most common job-related attributes that employers look for in candidates before making an offer are as follows. 36% of employers look for multitasking skills, 31% of employers look for initiative, and 21% of employers look for creative thinking. So these are some of the most common personal attributes that they're looking for at interviews. So, if you're thinking about your responses and you're preparing your situations that you'll talk about before your interview, if you've got any that sort of demonstrate these skills and attributes, you might want to include those. On average, interviews last 40 minutes. It usually takes 24 hours to 2 weeks to hear from the company with their decision. This is just to give you an idea. So after your interview, you want to sort of track it and mark on your calendar when you had the interview, and give yourself a little reminder through your Google or Outlook calendar that, 2 weeks later, if you don't hear from them, you might want to send them a follow-up email or call even. 58% of employers said it's important to send a thank you after an interview. So it's best to do this in an email. I don't recommend you do it on the very day of the interview. It just seems too sort of knee-jerk reaction. That's just something you got to do. Give it a day, or even 2 days. Send a little email, tell them thank you, express your continued interest in the role, etc. Keep it brief, of course. Personalities and job interviews. So this is something that they can't tell very much from your application. Sometimes you can get a kind of a feel for someone's personality through their cover letter and how it's written, but not so much, right? So that's why one of the reasons they want to have the job interview. Personality is really an indicator of job performance, and interviewers tend to assess candidates' personality to determine if candidates are likely to thrive in the job and get along with coworkers and managers. That's a key reason for the job interview. 78% of employers surveyed have rated personality as the most influential quality when recruiting, right? This is why we have the interview still, is they really want to get a sense for what kind of person you are. The best way to express your personality is to simply be your most prepared self. Why? Why can't we change our personality? Well, science tells us that personality is at least 40% determined by genes, and the rest of our personality is developed over time by how our different genes interact with different environments. It's not really something that's very easy to change. So sometimes we might think, well, I'm not personally suited for this job. I don't like this job, or it's just not my type of people. It's not my type of thing, right? So if you're in that sort of category where you're wondering about that, you can research jobs that are ideal for different types of personalities through Myers-Briggs style tests. And there's a lot of free ones online available, like 16 personalities. And there's also some other sites that are very useful for people who are trying to find jobs that use their transferable skills that are similar or maybe very different from their past work, but use those same skills. And some of those sites include the National Occupation Classification function of OASIS, or the website Opportunext, and there's another one called Career One Stop, which is it's a newer one, and it's quite basic, but it's good as well. Best days and times for job interviews, right? So there's some days and times that are better than others for job interviews. Scheduling your interview at a time when the interviewers are most alert can improve the conversation and the interviewer's perception of your fit for the job. Okay. if possible, you want to try to avoid scheduling your job interview early in the morning when staff first arrives at work. And this will ensure that interviewers had the opportunity to take care of morning routines before setting into the interview process, right? You want them paying attention to you. You don't want them thinking about, what they got to do that day, or at the end of the day, thinking about things that they've forgotten, things that they have to take care the very next morning or something like that. Right. So optimal times for the interview are like mid-morning, so between 10 a.m. and 11. Setting your meeting mid-morning can ensure the interviewers are most alert, which increases your chances of receiving more positive reviews, right? If you're prepared, right, and you're demonstrating yourself well. Scheduling an interview right after lunch can run the risk of interviewers being less engaged because they may be hungry, right? Everyone gets hungry around lunchtime, interviewers as well, of course. So they're like right before lunch might not be the best time. And I've also read that right after lunch, sometimes people are a little sluggish after eating a large lunch. That might not be the most ideal time either. Opting for an interview midweek can ensure that everyone who is involved in the interview process is performing at their peak productivity. Arranging an interview on a Tuesday or a Wednesday is ideal. Of course, they don't always give you those options. And so if you don't have options, of course, you're just going to have to accept the time that they give you, right? Okay. So now we're into the sort of the start of the interview, right? So once you're in the interview room and the interview has begun, and we're going to talk about things leading up to the actual start of the interview a little bit after the break as well. That's also important. But we're starting now just with all the different types of questions that happen during the interview, because that's really quite important to start off with. So the first thing they might request of you is something like this. So tell me about yourself. And so it is an icebreaker in a way, but it is an important part, we know, because this is right at the start of the interview, right? And it's the very first 5 to 15 minutes when they make the not to hire decision, right? So if you're dressed inappropriately, or if you're slouching, or if you look like you've got some sort of attitude about you, those will all be a disadvantage. But also how you respond to this. Right, so tell me about yourself. This is going to give a strong first impression. So you want to practice it in advance. You want to have it timed. So you don't want it to be too brief, not less than 2 minutes, but not too long, right? Not over 3 minutes, give or take. So how should you prepare your answer? Well, these are some common things that you would talk about. You're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail with around 2 minutes or so, right? But these are some of the things that you would want to talk about. Your relevant education, your relevant experience. Just provide an overview, right? And in that overview, you would talk about the most relevant organizations, position titles, tasks that you performed, and the skills that you've developed over that time. Could also include your education, right, if it's relevant. Right? Remember, it's very time sensitive, so you're just going to sort of touch on the most important points. You want to have it structured well, which means you want to prepare it in advance. Some interviews beforehand, they'll tell you, well, we also want to know what your hobbies are, what kind of person you are, and whatnot. And if they ask you for that, then prepare that. But if they don't, then you can just assume that they want to know about you professionally, right, as you apply to the job. Okay, then there are some other very common questions that interviewers sort of start with. It's not always in this order, but quite often it is. And these are common questions that really test your knowledge of the job, if you really know what you're getting yourself into. All right. Please give me your definition of a policy analyst, including responsibilities and tasks. That's assuming that you're applying for a job as a policy analyst. So that question, is really to test your knowledge of the job, how much you've thought about it, and how much you understand it, right? Like if you can't really describe the job that you're applying for, that doesn't look good. You want to really show that you know what you're getting yourself into. And also, sometimes a job in Canada with a certain title is not exactly the same job as a job in another country that has the same title, right? Same title, slightly different job. So you want to definitely spend some time reviewing the job posting that you're applying for, that you're having the interview for, to be able to talk about it, right? And explain your understanding of it. Another question they could ask is, why do you want to work in the banking industry, right? Or why do you want to work at the at Scotiabank, right? You want to know about the company. What are their strengths? What's their history? What are they known for? What are their services and products, right? Why are you impressed with them, right? More common questions. Please tell us your salary expectations. So I touched on this a little earlier, right? You want to state your range. So you can always use the Explore Careers page that Jack talked about during the first workshop. And you want to give a rationale for how you've landed on that range, right? So talk a little bit about your past work experience, your accumulated knowledge, right? If you're not asking for the very base salary, you want to explain why you deserve higher than the base. Right? Share some of the research that you've done, note the skills and experience that make you a strong fit, right? And of course, acknowledge that salary is just one of the factors that will play into your decision to accept the job or not, right? There are other things. You want to make sure that the company and the job is a right fit for you. Do you have a social insurance number or SIN number? Can you please provide it? So it's not illegal for employers to ask you to provide a social insurance number, but legally you are not required to provide it, right, until you are hired. So whether or not you decide to provide it to the employer is up to you. That's a judgment call, and it should be based on how much you trust the employer. So a really reputable large company, they're asking you for that. It might just be to sort of make their systems go faster. I know even very reputable companies that did ask for the social insurance number right at the interview. But they don't need to, and you don't need to give it. So only give it if you trust in that employer. If you don't, you could explain that you do have it, but you would prefer to provide it once you receive and both of you agree on a contract, right? On salary and contract and all of that. Another common question is, what are your weaknesses, right? So there's all different people have different weaknesses. It's useful to spend some time thinking about what your weaknesses are. It's a very common job interview question in Canada. So you might mention some of those weaknesses, but you should try to limit those weaknesses to weaknesses that you've addressed, right? So some sort of weakness that used to maybe be a little bit of an issue and that you have now addressed it. So it's no longer a problem for you, right? What are behavioral interview questions? So behavioral interview questions are some of the most common types of questions that they're going to ask at job interviews. It would be very surprising, it should be, if you ever went to a job interview and they didn't ask you any behavioral interview questions. Most of the questions are going to be behavioral interview questions. So these are open-ended questions, right? So these are questions that are not simply yes or no answers. They are how you handled challenges in the past, usually, right? These are usually questions about how you've handled some sort of challenge at work. There are also questions about how you developed skills, experience, and acquired knowledge. Right? All of these questions, all behavioral interview questions, require very specific answers. Providing general information and not enough detail about situations is the biggest problem that newcomers have in answering behavioral interview questions. Not all, but some, because many newcomers are not accustomed to Canadian job interviews. It makes total sense. But in Canadian job interviews, for the behavioral interview question, you have to provide specific examples. You can't just talk about your past in general. I used to do this. Over the years, I've done that. Normally, I do this or that, right? They want specific examples describing actual events, projects, or work experiences. There is a certain answering strategy that is very well known and that employers even use to grade answers, called the STAR answering strategy. So the STAR answering strategy, this is an acronym. It stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. This is a storytelling technique. Situation, task, action, result. This is like the background of the story, right? The goal, right, is the task. The actions that someone did to fulfill that goal or task, and then the results, the end of the story, the good ending, the nice, happy ending, right? Situation is the background, task is the responsibility or goal, action is the things you did to achieve that goal, and result is the result, right? It's pretty simple. So for the situation, you would want to state your position title, the organization, and the years that you worked there. Years are sort of optional, right? So this is the background. So if I ask you a question like, imagine that you're interviewing for a job as a customer service representative at Scotiabank, right? And you used to work at another bank. And imagine that the question is, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer at work, right? So you would think for a minute, pause. It's okay to pause. Think back to all the examples that you prepared at home in preparing for your job interview. And you might remember one situation when you were working at the Royal Bank, perhaps. So you would start by explaining the situation. So you would say, when I was a customer service representative at the Royal Bank of Canada, where I worked from 2000 to 2009, right? That's the start of the background, right? And then you're going to start talking about that situation. A client came into the bank angry about a failed bank transaction, right? So you would describe that transaction that was failed, what they were angry, were they disturbing the other customers, whatever. You're just explaining the situation, right? You're giving details. Be sure to give enough detail for the interviewer to understand. Right, so this is just your job, the organization, when you worked there, and then the specifics of the situation. The customer coming in angry and yelling about a failed bank transaction, whatever it is. Okay, and now this could be from volunteer positions as well, or school if you don't have very much work experience, but it's preferable to use work experience. Then you explain the task. So this is what you were responsible for in that job. If you were the custodian, you would be responsible for cleaning the floors and the toilets. But you're not. You're the customer service representative, right, at the Royal Bank. So what did you have to do? So you would say, right, as a bank teller, I was responsible for ensuring that all clients' banking needs were met in a timely and effective manner in order to promote further business. That's your goal. That's your task. Doesn't mean that's what you did. That's not the actions, but that's what your task was to do. Then you would say your actions. You would say, well, I calmed them down. I told them it's a common problem, brought them to a private meeting room, offered them a coffee to calm them down, whatever you did, right, as in that specific situation. Right? What specific steps did you take? So sometimes in jobs, we're working often as a team, right? In these answers, you want to focus on what you did, not what your team. You don't want to be using a lot of we's, right? You want to be using I's, what I did. They're not interviewing your whole team. They don't care what they did in this type of question. They want to know what you did. Then you would explain the result, right? The outcome of your actions, right? And don't be shy about taking credit for your behavior. What happened? How did the event end? What did you accomplish? What did you learn? Make sure your answers contain multiple positive results if you can, if there are. Okay, so this is super important, right? So because at the interview, if you don't talk about the situation, if you don't tell them what job or company, it's very difficult for them to imagine you in a place, right? Many people, when they're hearing a story, they sort of picture it while you're telling the story. But if you don't say what job you're in or what type of company, people are wondering that, right? And then they're not really paying attention to your task or your actions so much. They're like, what job is it? Maybe they're looking at your resume to try to figure out what job you're talking about, right? As the person being interviewed, it really is your responsibility to impress them with your preparation, to show that you have prepared, and to show that you are considerate of what they know and what they don't know, right? If you don't talk about your situation first, they feel this person is not considering my needs as the interviewer. And you're going to be the one paying for not doing that, right? Not them. They've already got the job, right? It's very, very often, even when I'm doing a practice interview, I'll often send the questions to my clients, right? And I've spent time preparing them for my clients. I've put the questions and I've written this question should be in situation, task, action, result. And I send it. And then so often people will start responding to the answers and not tell me the job or the organization they're in. And I honestly, I'm wondering a little bit, why didn't they prepare? I've explained to them clearly how to prepare. I prepared this thing. And we even talk about it in the workshop. At the interview, the employer is not thinking as much like that. But what they are thinking is, I don't understand what this person's talking about. What job are they talking about? Are they talking about a job they did last year or 10 years ago, right? It's your responsibility as the interviewer, as the interviewee, to be clear in your stories, right? To explain yourself clearly so that the employer can just listen and understand. Okay? So preparing your stories in advance. How do we do this if we don't know the questions they're going to ask? Well, you can't do it exactly if you don't know all the questions, but you can make some pretty educated guesses about the types of questions they're going to ask you based on the job posting and about what we know about very common interview questions. All right. So we recommend that you use the very common interview questions that we're going to give you shortly, plus your job posting, before an interview to prepare and practice 5 to 7 achievement-based stories in advance so that when you're asked questions at the interview, you don't have to think from your whole past work experience and think all in that 2 seconds when the interviewers are staring at you waiting for an answer about what example to tell and how to deliver it using the STAR strategy, right? That's a lot of pressure on yourself, almost impossible to successfully pick the best story and deliver it properly using the STAR presentation strategy. You have to prepare them in advance. And that's why we recommend prepare 5 to 7 of those stories in advance. So when you prepare those 5 to 7 achievement-based stories in advance in the STAR presentation strategy, right, you should then practice them out loud, right? Say them out loud at home many times. Say them with partners, friends, whomever, your employment counselor, myself, or Jack. Practice saying them again and again until you can sort of pull out of your imaginary hat these 5 to 7 stories and apply them to different types of questions, maybe tweak them a little bit depending on what they're specifically asking, right? Maybe one story which you would normally use to describe a challenging project was also a project where you work with many different team members. And then so you can talk about the same project and experience. For one question, you'd be highlighting its challenges and why it was so challenging. And you could use that same story and experience to answer another question about a time when you worked with a team, right? When you were productive and successfully worked with a team, right? You can often use the same experiences to answer different questions. Okay? So 5 to 7 is what we recommend. What types of stories should you prepare in advance? Well, here are some of the common questions and types of questions that they ask at job interviews. Remember, you're going to also use the job posting, but these here are some of the common types of questions that they ask. They're going to ask about your greatest work-related achievement, perhaps. Times when you showed initiative and took the lead. These are all on the last pages of your handout. You don't have to take note of these. Times when you worked as part of a team. Time when you overcame a difficult problem with a coworker. Dealt with an upset client or customer in person or on the telephone, worked within tight deadlines, or had to prioritize multiple tasks or a heavy workload. Time when you learned from mistakes, worked with a challenging project, right? These are some of the most common ones. You can also find other common questions based on different jobs online. Right? If you're having trouble thinking of situations, right, you're trying to put together your 5 to 7 different experiences, projects for these types of questions and job postings, what you could do is sort of work backwards. Think of which ones did you achieve something outstanding that you're proud of, right? And maybe that story is one that you could use to answer a few different types of questions. If you don't prepare these in advance, you're more likely to have no response and not be able to think of one, or think of one that's not relevant, right? If you got no response, you don't get any points, right? Interviews are generally point-based from the interviewer's side. They're grading. When I used to do interviews quite a bit, we would always grade out of 5, right? So there'd be me and sometimes 3 other people, a manager and 2 other counselors. We'd be asking the candidates questions. Me and the 2 other counselors, we'd be writing down everything they said. And then at the end of the question, we would grade them out of 5, right? And then sometimes we would even have like a star sort of rubric, right? With actions, what they did, and result, right? Very, very key. We couldn't really clearly explain the relevancy of the actions, though, if we didn't know the situation, but we were mostly focusing in on the actions and the results. Okay. All right. Next, what if you have trouble thinking of a relevant example? And that can happen sometimes. You can be thrown off, of course. It's fine to take a short pause before you answer to allow time to think of a relevant example. Okay? You can take a short pause. It's perfectly okay to do that. If you still can't think of a relevant example, then ask the interviewer to come back to the question at another time. Okay? And that they'll usually do that at the end of the interview. I would recommend only doing that maximum one time. You don't want the interviewers to have to track all these questions that you couldn't answer. Okay? All right, so we're pretty much at the halfway point. We can take a few questions before we have a short break. I'm just going to look at my participant list. So if you have any questions about any of the material that we've done so far today, you can just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll go one at a time. Hello, Philip. I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Please,
yes.
go ahead.
Sure. So, now, I have, I've done in the past, like, you do an interview and, you feel like you did really well. And then just to get an answer, I don't know. I feel like some companies, they're just required to conduct interviews, even though they already maybe picked somebody in advance, maybe somebody who was already working for them, like a new position opened up. And then, they would just, I don't know if that's something real that happens with Canadian companies.
Well, I mean, I suppose it could happen. I mean, that's a lot of extra work for nothing, though, to arrange, because interviews are really time consuming, right? Like, people got to take time out of their day, and then if you're interviewing people, I remember we used to have to do those over several days. You got to like reschedule appointments. It's a lot of work. We would never be doing interviews if we didn't actually have to. That's not to say that some places may do that, but like if they're going to hire someone that they already know, I think that they probably already know that at the application stage, right? Like they've got John from accounting or whatever who's applied and everyone loves John. And then you've got some other people who look like they're maybe just as well qualified, but we don't know if we know them. We love John. They're not going to really interview everyone again, although it's possible, right? It is possible. Yeah. But I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, right? You just got to prepare. Like nothing you can do. You can't, like, you're not going to go run an investigation or anything, right? Okay.
No, true. Yeah, I understand. I do understand.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions? No? Okay, so let's take a short break. My watch says 10:53. Let's come back at 11 and we'll get started with the second half. Okay. We talked a little bit about behavioral interview questions, and now we're going to talk about situational interview questions. Hypothetical interview questions. They're also sometimes called situational. So these, I think it's pretty self-explanatory from the title. This is where the interviewer uses a hypothetical situation and asks you how you would handle it. So obviously, there are many different types of hypothetical situations that they could ask you about. No matter what they ask you, you definitely want to present your response in steps, right? Because there's a few key things that you want to address in your answer. One, whatever you decide to do in that hypothetical situation, and it does take some time to pause, to think about your different options, because in every hypothetical situation, there are multiple options, obviously. First thing you want to do is explain your reasoning about why you would do what you would do if you were in that situation. And in that explanation, you want to show your values, right? So either it's caring for another coworker or prioritizing another task over something else. You want to explain why that's important. And in doing so, right, you want to demonstrate your tact and professionalism, right? There's often different situations, and some of them are given to you as a test for how professional you would be and how thoughtful you would be of the other people in that situation. There was one common question that used to be asked at Public Works, the Department of Public Works, and it was for a junior policy analyst interview. So the candidates were asked, and told to imagine that they were hired and that they had to assess a policy that involved several other departments, and that after that policy was reviewed, they had to make some suggestions and invite over some department heads from some other departments to present their findings, right? And in this hypothetical situation, one of the department heads from the other departments raises his hand and questions the analyst about some of the statistics in their presentation. And the candidate for this job is asked, well, what would you do if you were in this situation? And the department head questioned you and stated that some of your statistics were not correct. There's lots of different things that the candidate could say for that sort of response. But in the question, in the hypothetical situation that was given to the candidate, the interviewers drop several little hints. One of those hints is that the boardroom is booked for 1 hour in the middle of the afternoon, and that's when the department heads are supposed to come to hear the presentation. That specific timing of the boardroom was included in the hypothetical situation in order to test the candidate, to see if the candidate would appreciate that they have just 1 hour to make this quite lengthy and important presentation to department heads, and that in that hour there would not be time to review the origins of all of their statistical information required, right? Therefore, if the candidate said, well, if I was questioned about my statistical information by a department head, I would bring up all the origins and the resources and then explain how those resources are adequate and can be trusted, that kind of thing. They didn't want that for that reason of time, and two, because they would therefore be immediately challenging the knowledge of one of their superiors, being the department head from a partner department, right? So there's a few little hints that they'll often drop, that if you're knowledgeable of the type of job, of the sector, of the situation, those little hints would guide you into one direction over another in your responses. Right? So it's very important that you have to listen very carefully to those little hints, those little clues that they'll often drop in the situations. Okay, that's a rather complex hypothetical interview question. There's a lot more simple questions that are very common, such as, what would you do if you were put in a situation where you were required to put in additional effort to complete a task, right? Much simpler hypothetical interview question. What if I instructed you to make a change to your schedule that warranted you to prioritize a separate obligation over finishing a task at work? Right? All of these, you want to spend a little bit of time thinking about your response before delivering it. Take some time, pause. How would you react if you had to complete a task that made you dissatisfied with your job? How would you address this with management? This could be a trick even, right? Maybe this is a certain task that everyone doesn't like, right? Does it mean that you're going to be dissatisfied with the job as a whole? Is it something that you would address necessarily with management? Again, things that you want to think about, right? So hypothetical interview questions can be tricky. They're not always going to ask you hypothetical interview questions at a job interview, but we wanted to provide you with some information about this. So remember, steps, explain your reasoning, showed proper judgment, professional, and be tactful in your response, and listen carefully to those clues. Okay, now we're getting to we're getting back to sort of like another one of the big goals of this workshop, right, is to show you the importance of being organized and prepared, right? Being organized and prepared, you're going to be more relaxed, you're going to be more confident, and you're going to be more forgiving of yourself, right? If you don't understand, if you didn't prepare for a certain question, which you can't prepare for them all, right? You're going to be more calm, and if things don't go out 100%, you're not going to be beating yourself up too badly over it, right? But the big goal is to have you more relaxed and prepared. Okay, so we're going to go over some really common things for preparation for interview questions. Number one, and this is in your handout, step one, research the company, know their products, what they do, and who their competitors are. Step two, research the position, learn the job posting, and research the position further through the National Occupation Classification Codes. These are the descriptions and other similar job postings. Some job postings are pretty vague. It's useful to use other job postings of the same kind of job to sort of remind yourself and get an idea of what is really important. Research the interviewer, view their LinkedIn profile, and learn about their roles within the company. Knowledge is power. More you know, more confident you'll be in responding to their questions. Now, this isn't always possible, right? Often, or most of the time even, we don't know exactly who the interviewer is. But if you can figure it out through their website or through LinkedIn, that could be beneficial. Step four, list your greatest strengths with examples that make you a good fit for the position. So this is really the preparation for the job interview questions, right? This is the first part, step four, right? List all your greatest strengths connected to what make you a good fit for this job. Step five, use those common interview questions that we provided, right? Not all of them are going to be applicable for every job. Some of them will. And use the job posting for this job that you're interviewing for to prepare behavioral interview questions that the interviewer might ask, right? You're preparing as though you're the interviewer. Step 6, use your list of strengths and examples. That's from step 4, right? To write or type answers to the behavioral interview questions that you prepared in step 5. Step 7, practice, right? Practice and then record your answers with an audio recorder. First practice, no recording. Practice until you're sure that you remember the questions and your answers in detail, right? And then ask yourself the questions. You can read those questions, ask them, but do not read your responses. Answer the best that you can, record it, listen to it, and then check against the notes that you've written for each answer. Are you telling the complete story? Are you able to do it? If you can't do it when you're sitting at home with family or friend, or you're doing it online with me and Jack, then when you're nervous in the real interview with 4 or 5 people in a panel staring at you, you certainly won't be able to do it, right? You need to be able to talk about these 5 to 7 stories as examples to 11 or 12 questions, right? You have to be able to do that for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. And remember and tell those questions and those stories without reading them, without missing important points. Well, if you can't do that well when you're home, as I said, you're not going to be able to do it when you're nervous at the interview, right? You want to be able to be talking about these stories as though they happened yesterday for you. Okay, so keep practicing until you can present them naturally without having to read your notes. Now, the main parts of the interview, we're going to go over that. Sometimes the interview questions are provided to candidates in advance by email, right? They'll send you those, and that's common for virtual interviews. Or on paper for in-person interviews. I've had it on interviews when I was younger, where I'd go in and they'd give me a piece of paper, sit me in another room and say, we'll come get you in about 10 minutes. These are the questions, in case you want to take a couple notes. At the start of the interview, they'll bring you into the room. The panel will interview themselves. There could be 2 people on the panel. There could be, I had an interview once at World Skills, my very first interview. I think there were 6 people on the panel. There'll be the first question, which is the breaking the ice, which you know how important that one is. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We talked all about how to prepare that. Then often there'll be all those questions to test your knowledge of the job, company, industry, service, products, salary expectations. And then there'll be the interviewer's main question. And those will be definitely many situational, possibly some hypothetical question. And these, of course, are all to see if you have the skills and necessary experience and knowledge to be successful in the job. Could be a role play situation. This is more common for social service or customer service interviews, right? This is where some acting is involved on the part of the interview and some hypothetical behavior on the part of the candidate. And then there's the closing of the interview. And this is where the interviewers will give you information about next stages in the hiring process. If they don't, you'll want that to be one of your questions as a candidate. Other questions could be anything about the job, the start of the job, training, orientation, details about a project that you would be working on, right? To have intelligent questions, you have to do your research, right? Just like the rest of the preparation. Then, as a candidate, you should thank the interviewers for the opportunity for the interview, right? Also, this is especially true for a lot of government jobs. Since we are in Ottawa, it's worth mentioning that there can be a test, right, afterward. Private sector as well. I think for a lot of World Skills positions, they do give little tests at the end to test knowledge of the sector, test writing ability. There can be different purposes of different tests. Interview day preparation tips. These are just some tips for interview preparation. Don't wait until the last minute to print out copies of your resume. Do as much of that preparation in the days leading up to your interview, not the day of. You'll find that you're going to be nervous the day of. Your schedule for that day is probably a little different because you've got this interview coming up. Maybe you're a little bit nervous still. Do as much as you can before. including your ironing, right? Lay out your clothes, do the ironing the day before. Do the best you can to get a good night's sleep before the interview. Sleep's very important. Map out your travel route the day before, right? To check out traffic reports, give yourself plenty of travel time, and arrive to the interview 10 minutes early. When you're at the interview, right, or going in there, keep in mind that the hiring manager may be nervous too. So if you're smiling, right, that's infectious. It will make other people be more at ease, and that'll put you at ease, right? So smiling never hurt. Keep a positive attitude. Focus on your strengths and your purpose, right? Maybe review that initial step 4 document that we talked about in preparation for the interview, your greatest strengths that make you a good fit for this job. Turn off your cell phone before entering the building. You don't want it vibrating, pinging, buzzing, ringing, anything like that when you're in that office. Don't chew gum in the office if you're a gum chewer, and if you're a smoker, don't smoke directly before the interview. You'll have that smell of cigarettes on you, and you could definitely be discriminated against for that. Normalize, right? Don't stress about the fact that you're stressed out. You don't want to be put into a state of shock by your stress. Oh my God, I'm stressed. I'm going to do terrible. Almost everyone's stressed in an interview. Not everyone does terrible, right? So you want to remember that you've prepared the best that you can, right? As long as you have, and dial your anxiety down. You don't want it getting in the way, except that a little bit of anxiety is normal at a job interview. Allow yourself plenty of time to sit in your car or a coffee shop somewhere close to the office to gather your thoughts, breathe, and center yourself. You don't want to be rushed. You don't want to be like all sweating and just there right on time and haven't had a chance to sort of calm yourself down. Take some of that time before your interview, right? Think of it as a conversation between two people to see if this is the right fit. Who knows? Maybe you're going to get into the interview and you're going to look around the office and you'll be like, I don't want to work in this place, right? You don't know. Right? This is an initial meeting for most cases. How should you dress for the interview? So you should always dress for the interview and not for the job, which means dressing conservatively, right? Even if it's a job in a fairly relaxed environment. Dressing conservatively and professionally shows that you're respecting the interview and the employer and that they matter and that you're respecting them and the situation, right? They've invited you to their office, to their place of work for a possible opportunity. Avoid perfumes and body and hand creams, right? Some people have allergies or just different tastes. They don't like smelling other people's chosen scents. Eat foods that reduce stress and improve mood and memory. That's a good habit for most times. Broccoli and walnuts have been shown to reduce cortisol and adrenaline levels, as well as prevent memory loss. Dark chocolate. This increases serotonin and endorphin levels, which in turn improves mood. Honey has been shown to reduce inflammation in the brain, which lowers level of anxiety, anger, and depression. And of course, real honey, which is very hard to find these days, I am sure is even better. Mango is filled with a compound called linalool, which has been shown to lower stress levels, right? And mango tastes pretty good too, and it's pretty easy to get. Not always fresh, but frozen's pretty easy to find. How should you prepare for a virtual interview? This was a question that we saw in the chat a little earlier. How do you prepare for a virtual interview? Well, prepare a simple, clean, and professional background in your home, right? You don't want distractions in the background. Test the light and the camera for effect. Make sure there are no visual or audio distractions. Kids, cats climbing around on the shelves. You definitely do not want any of that. If necessary, it's a good idea to set up notes that you can glance at during the interview to keep you on track, right? This is something that I used to do years ago, just even for telephone interviews. I had set up little notes on the wall, and then so I could glance at them. I remember I had an interview for a teaching job at an adult high school many years ago, and I was, they gave me the questions in advance, and it was like, Tell us about adult learning theory. And I hadn't really studied much adult learning theory up to that point, so I had to write little notes, and I taped them all over the wall. That's something that you can do. Write little reminder notes. Try to keep them fairly close to the camera on your laptop or on your PC, so that when your eyes are sort of wandering a couple inches to the wall, it's not going to be too noticeable if you have to and want to just glance at those notes. So virtual interviews, we talked about, these are very, very common now, especially since COVID. For an in-person interview, what should you take with you? So what items should you bring with you? Well, you should always bring 2 to 3 copies of your resume. You never know if someone will forget the copy that they printed off at their desk. You could save them the trip. No, I brought a couple extra copies. It's a very nice touch for them, you to have that for them. Paper and a pen. Right, you want to have that. If they give you, the questions on paper, you don't have to ask them for a pen to write notes. That seems pretty unprepared. Questions for the employer. Have these memorized, but have them written down as well, just in case. You've got enough pressure going in there with remembering and preparing and practicing all your answers without having to absolutely remember all your questions. If you've got a few questions, then have those written down in notes. Copies of educational credentials, right? And if those are requested by the employer, then make sure you bring those in. But usually for most interviews, you do not need to bring that with you. If you have letters of recommendation from past employers that are recent and relevant, so like from supervisors and they're not too old and it's this relevant type of job, you might want to bring in some copies of those. And at the end of the interview, you say, I've also got a couple of letters of recommendation. Would you like them? They'll take them, and it could make a difference. Who knows? Your reference sheet, very important. We talked about this at the resume workshop, all about structuring it. Well, we're going to look at it again today. Make sure you bring that. And don't forget that you should have spoken with your references fairly close to the time of the interview to make sure that they still remember you, that their telephone numbers are the same, their emails are the same, that they're aware that you're interviewing so that they won't be caught off guard when they get a telephone call from the employer. Right? This is the same sample that we looked at during the resume workshop, right? Of a reference sheet. You got your header, looks exactly the same as the resume that you submitted, same font, size, style, spacing, everything. Keep it nice and consistent with the document you had. And you got your references here. Usually, often they'll ask for 2 supervisors, 2 colleagues, or 2 supervisors, 1 colleague. Here, we can see some extra information is added to clarify the situation of each reference for the employer. So if we look here, Edward Thompson, he is presently the warehouse foreman at Delaney Export Company. However, looking at Jane's resume, Jane never worked at Delaney Export Company. Jane worked at ABC Company, though, which is why Jane wrote this in her reference sheet, that Edward was formerly a manager at ABC Company. Now the employer knows why Edward is included in this reference sheet, because Edward was probably her manager at ABC Company. Here, under Mary Higgins, Mary has written that Mary Higgins is now retired. Why did Jane write that? Because the employer is going to want to know that if Mary Higgins is a professor at London Business College, why is a home telephone number and personal email included instead of the telephone number at London Business College and the email for London Business College? Because she is retired, right? It's your responsibility to provide clarity to the employer, right? Just like this. First impression counts. Right, we've got a guy coming in here for a job interview. A receptionist says, I knew you were coming, and her hands are on a little Ouija board here, a little bit of black magic in the office. Arrive to the interview 10 minutes early. Politely introduce yourself to the receptionist. When you're in the waiting area, don't play around with your cell phone and magazines. Take in the environment around you. It's probably your first time in there. You can tell a lot just by looking around at things. Stand and shake hand with the person who comes to escort you into the interview, right? So why did she know actually that he was coming? Because the receptionist is often actually involved in the interview. It's not because they're playing with Ouija boards. It's because often the manager has told her, we're conducting interviews today. We're expecting these 5 people throughout the day. Take note of any of their demeanor, their behavior, anything that sort of strikes you, right? And then so those, the receptionist opinions can actually make a bit of a difference. Years ago, I had an interview for a job at a high school in Montreal as a math teacher. I'm not a math teacher, actually. I studied English and history. Anyway, I was invited for a interview teaching math. And before my interview with the principal, I was sitting chatting for quite a while I waited with the receptionist, this older woman. We had this long talk about English muffins, and I had just come back from Asia and I was eating it, and that was her lunch. And so we were talking about that kind of stuff. I was offered the job teaching math, to my surprise. And when I came in to sign the contract and discuss the terms with the principal, I said, I'm just curious why I was hired. I mean, I'm appreciative of the job, but I've got no experience at all teaching math. I'm wondering, is there a shortage of math teachers? And she's like, no, we do have math teachers. We interviewed one other one, but Doris, our receptionist, had a lot of great things to say about you. She thought you had a good personality and you'd fit our team. And so we decided to give you a try. So I was given this job basically and unbelievably just by my conversation with Doris, this elderly receptionist who had been working at the school for a very long time. It turns out it was a mistake on the principal's part because I quit after 2 months because I hated teaching math. But the point is that often speaking with and being kind to people and observing your surroundings at the interview when you're there can go a long way. Interview etiquette. So behavior at the interview. Before sitting down, give the interviewers a firm handshake, right? So this is one of the old-fashioned things in North America is that people will judge you on how firm your handshake is, and it's true. Wait to be seated, right? After you shake hands with all of your interviewers, stand behind a chair until you are invited to sit down or politely ask where the interviewer would like you to sit. When you take your seat at the interview table, do not place personal items on the table. You may place a portfolio or notepad or pen in front of you, right? Especially in the winter when you've got lots of gear. Luckily, we're at the end of that period, and hopefully you'll all be working by next winter. But in the winter, though, you never know. You might be looking for jobs again in the winter. Don't place all your gear on the table. It looks very unprofessional. Sit up straight. When you're sitting up straight, your voice naturally projects better than if you're hunched over, right? You want a clear voice and you want it to sound confident, right? So sit up straight. Do not criticize past employers. Do not rush, and do not emphasize money, right? The big 3. At one job I was at where I would be involved in interviews. This is about many years ago. I was on a leave of absence from World Skills for 6 months, and I was in another job for that 6 months, and I was involved in interviews there. And one of the things is we had one candidate, and she mentioned something about her past employer. She seemed pretty a good fit. After the interview, the manager said, nope, we're not even going to think about her. We don't want anyone who's criticizing their past bosses. So they're like, we know people at that organization. All right, so no, you don't want to do that. No verbal communication at the job interview, right? Non-verbal communication at the job interview. So smiling, right? Very important. We already talked about that. Maintaining eye contact with the interviewers. Try not to sit with both your hands beneath the table. This makes you look like a very nervous child. All right. Rest your arms on the chair or on the edge of the table, right? Maintain an open posture, so don't cross your arms, right? It makes it look like you're hiding something or you're hostile, right? Try to align your shoulders with the shoulders of the person whom you're speaking whenever possible, and do the best when you're talking to a number of different people, right? Sometimes you've got other people at the interviewer other than the main interviewer writing notes, right? Glance at them from time to time. They're also involved. You are talking to them as well. Do not fidget in the chair, cross your legs, or wring your hands, and try not to use too many hand gestures. These are distracting for the interviewers. You want them focusing on what you're saying. If you're someone who's nervous and moves their hands a lot, you might want to hold on a pen or a pencil with both hands very lightly between your fingers, and this will be a way to control your hand motions, and it's good to practice this as well when you're doing your practice interviews. Okay. Another tip, keep your feet on the floor during the interview. Some people want to cross their legs to make them into a more relaxed pose, but doing this, crossing your legs and having one foot off the ground, sort of shows a little bit of lack of respect or interest in the situation. Okay, in the interview. What questions should you ask at the end of the interview? It's recommended to ask one or two specific questions about the job or company to show that you're invested and that you've been paying attention throughout the process, right? So do your research. If you've done that in your preparation, you probably do have some questions, right? And while you're preparing, note those questions. By the end of your preparation, you might have several questions listed. You can say, yeah, this one's a good one to ask. This is a good one to ask, right? Customize your question to the specific position and company. Also, it's okay to ask questions when it makes sense throughout the conversation. You don't have to wait till the end of the interview, right? It's fine. Also, at the end, if you've already asked some questions, you can change them, and maybe new information that's come up during the interview has prompted new questions. You can change those as well, right? It's for you, those questions. Don't forget to ask also about the next stages in the hiring process if they haven't already told you, right? It's important for you to know what are the next stages. What's the timeline, right? Also, it shows them that you're still interested in the job and that you're confident enough in yourself to think that there could be next stages for you. You could go forward in this competition. Your exit strategy. So at the end of the interview, right, you want to reiterate your interest in the position and thank the group for spending time with you before you leave the interview room. Make eye contact, shake hands with everyone in the room before you leave. If possible, meaning if it's on your way out, you can stop at that outer office and thank the individual who greeted you when you arrived or who escorted you into the interview room, most likely the receptionist. Okay, so we are at the end of our presentation today. We covered a lot of material. There are sometimes questions and scenarios that people have or are concerned about, and so we have time now to go over any of those that you might have, or to discuss any questions or concerns about any of the material that we've covered so far in this workshop, or even in any of the others if some of them have come by and you think that it'll be applicable to everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to just raise your hand in the chat if you have any questions, and I'll ask in order that they come up. I see that Judy Jean-Baptiste, if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for the references.
Okay.
If those persons are not in the job, I mean, the job is passed. Can I put the past position, or I have to ask this person for a new position?
No, I mean, references, sometimes they will ask you for like a reference of a supervisor in your current organization. They might specify that. But if they don't specify anything other than 2 supervisors and maybe 1 coworker, yes, you can absolutely reach out and ask one of your past supervisors from a previous job if they would allow you to use them as a reference. But you definitely want to contact them and ask them, because their telephone number might have changed. They might not remember you very well. Their email address might have changed. Maybe they don't check their email or their voicemail very often. You want to make sure that the employer can reach that person, right? Because if the employer can't reach your reference, if they call and no one answers, if they leave a voicemail and no one calls them back, or if they send an email and no one replies, what they count that as is no reference contacted, right? And they're not going to call you again and say, oh, we wanted 3 references, you only gave us 2, could you give us another one? They're not going to do that. They're going to just see that you provided them with 2 references, but one of them was non-reachable, right? And they wanted 3. So you want to it's your responsibility to make sure that all your references can be contacted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, do we have any other questions? Anything at all?
Yes, David.
Yes, is this
This is Kafayat.
Kafayat? Go ahead, please.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to request if you could answer the last 2 questions on the hypothetical slide. I think that would be on slide 17.
Slide 17, okay.
Yeah, the last 2 questions on the slide.
Slide 17, okay. I'm going to it now. Okay, slide 17. Well, these are going to be different for different people.
Yeah,
right?
just give us an example and try to answer, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it's going to be very different for different people for different types of jobs. Like for me, for my job, if I was instructed to make a change to my schedule that warranted me to prioritize a separate obligation over finishing a task at work, you see, my tasks are client-based, right? Like this would not be a very good question for my job, because my current obligation are my workshops, which can't be changed. These are scheduled. And then also my other tasks are meeting clients one-on-one, and those are all scheduled far in advance. So if I had a new obligation or task, I would simply reschedule my clients as requested by my employer. So this wouldn't be a very good question for my type of job, right? This is like a really easy fix. I just reschedule my clients. Right. So the second one, how would you react if you had to complete a task that made you dissatisfied with your job? Like for me personally, if it was a task that made me dissatisfied with my job and it was an ongoing task, then I would probably discuss this with my manager, and I would explain it to see if there would be anything that could be done about it, if this task could be shared or something along those lines. But for some jobs, right, you've got long-term tasks that are going to completely change the nature of your work completely, like for the long term. So that could be very different for different types of jobs. Like my tasks in my job are pretty standard and repetitive. I've been working as an employment counselor at WorldSkills for 18 years. So I do workshops every single month, and I see hundreds of clients every couple months. So, I mean, again, this would not be that good of a question for my type of a job. Although it's possible that for a job like mine, it could be asked. But I would say that for this type of job, this would be one that you would talk about with management if it actually did cause long-term dissatisfaction, and see if there's any other type of roles that could be taken on or tasks that could be taken on instead. But again, for different jobs, it could be different. Okay? Okay. Do we have any other questions? If you like, you could unmute yourself.
Hi.
Yes, Chun-Yi, go ahead.
Yeah. May I ask her how many interview rounds are typically conducted in Canada? Is it common to have first one interview online and second one in person?
Yes, that's very common. Also, it's also common for there to be just a very short screening interview, which would be on phone, and then the other one could be online or in person. Yeah, but many are just all online. But sometimes there's short telephone screening. Probably many people in this workshop have had short screening telephone calls, yourself included, probably.
Okay, so most of the time they will use online interview.
Yeah, there's a lot of online interviews, like we saw in the stats earlier. They're more and more common, but in person is also very common. WorldSkills now has all their interviews in person. But I mean, if it's a remote job or if they're hiring someone remotely, a lot of companies will just do it online.
Yeah, and usually the online interview will how many times?
How many online? It depends. I mean, I've seen people go in for 3 interviews. I've seen people just have 1 interview. It's going to depend on the company. You can't say that it's any one common one. Like you just be prepared for very often there being several.
Yeah, and how long about the online interview?
Yeah, 45 minutes is pretty common.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It can be shorter. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Hello.
Hello, Philip.
Oh, yes. Just wanted to mention, I really appreciate the tips that you gave how to avoid stress right before the interview.
Oh, yes.
Definitely a victim of that, where you feel like you prepare so well and then you just panic during the interview.
Yes, I know. Okay. Myself, I panicked many times before interviews, even though prepared very well. People react differently. Myself, when I have an interview, I feel that I'm quite prepared going in. And often when I prepare well, I feel that I've answered quite well. But very often, strangely enough, when I leave the interview, I cannot recall hardly a single thing that I've said. That's very common. Many times when I've had interviews over the years, people after me ask, how do you think it went? And I would say, I think it went well. But I would sit there thinking, what did I say? And I cannot remember a thing. I seem to maybe... a different personality takes over or something, and I have no recollection of what that personality said at the interview. Anyway, people react differently. But yes, it is very important to try to relax before the interview. Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? No more? Okay, good. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I want to talk a little bit about the next steps of what's coming up next. So, as you know, this is the last workshop. And so I am going to now submit, everyone who completed this workshop to our admin person. Now, our admin person is going to send you a link to a follow-up sort of questionnaire. Now, it's super important that you fill out this questionnaire, especially if you want to have be matched with an employment counselor, meaning either myself or Jack at the end. If you don't fill out the form, we can't match you with any further services. It's just one of the requirements of our funder. We need these feedback forms filled. So what's going to happen is sometime this afternoon, our admin person, Ines, she's going to send you an email. And in that email, there will be a link to complete a very quick feedback questionnaire. You're going to have 24 hours to complete that. I recommend you just do it immediately. It only takes you a minute to fill that out. That way, when she sees that you have filled out that questionnaire, your email address is going to be included on the link that is sent to either myself or Jack to then reach out to you to arrange your first meeting with one of us, right? So the next step is to fill out that feedback form that you receive from Ines, and then you will receive an email from either myself or Jack, and that will be a booking link to book your first one-on-one appointment with us. That appointment, basically what we're going to do is explain to you a little bit about how we are there to support you going forward. We're going to talk a little bit about your job search, see if there's any other services or resources that might help. And if we've got time, we're going to take a look at your resume and cover letter. If you've in fact made some changes that are on to that since you first registered with us that you'd like us to review. And then any other referrals, we'll provide that to you as well. So please, if you want to have that one-on-one meeting with us to explain how we work with you going forward, please fill out that form as soon as you receive it. And like I said, that should be at some point this afternoon. I'm going to send this list to Ines right away, so you should get it fairly soon. Okay, do we have any questions about that? What's coming up next?
No, it's clear. Thank you.
All clear? Excellent. Okay, great. So then I'll say thank you very much to all of you, and have yourself a great afternoon going forward. For those of you who will be matched with Jack, I wish you the best of luck in your job search going forward, and have yourself a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.